1460 WVOX.
Stay tuned now for Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome, friends, to Westchester Eye on the Radio, your weekly discussion of issues relating to Westchester and the surrounding area. I'm John Sharan along with Ardina Seward, and we're going with one member short this week since our co-host Peter Moses is feeling a little under the weather and is unable to appear today. And Ardina, I understand we had to do some scrambling today to make sure we had a good guest.
Right, I'm going to call this MIA Monday because Peter is out, and we were supposed to have Alessandra Biaggi on the air, who is running for New York State Senate against Jeffrey Klein, but she had an emergency and could not be on. We will have her on at a future date. But in her stead, we have Robert Silverman, who is a longtime jazz musician, works all over the place. He's played with a lot of the greats, Jimmy Heath, you name it, and he works a lot with Alzheimer's patients also. And people would say, well, what does Alzheimer's have to do with jazz? I'm going to let Robert tell you about it. Robert, are you there on the air?
I'm here. I'm there. Well, I've been working with Alzheimer's patients and elderly people for about around 12 years, and I just got into it after I stopped teaching kids at high school. I decided to get into the teaching elderly people. I really enjoy it, and I teach classes in jazz history, but with the Alzheimer's people, especially at the Atria, I just do concerts and get to know the people, and we've also done some songwriting workshops with them. But whatever I do, I try to make jazz the focus. Because when I graduated from New England Conservatory in Boston, I kind of made a commitment to myself and said, when I'm not playing jazz, piano and trumpet, I want to be teaching about it or spreading jazz to whomever I work with, whether it be kids or elderly people or in jazz clubs.
But why did you choose to go into the jazz profession? You could have done a million other things and done quite well, made some big bucks. Why jazz? Well,
I think it kind of chose me. It's like people say the music chose me, because I was going to be an actor, director at Trinity College, but my band was doing quite well at that time in the 70s. I had a blues band, and then I was disenchanted with Trinity College, and I was very fortunate to meet Jackie McLean, the great jazz musician at heart, and attended his classes. He was a protege of Bird's, Charlie Parker's, and it really turned my life around. And I had been playing jazz before I got to college, but it just, the way I put it, the music bug just grabbed me real hard, and it's never let go. And I play trumpet and piano, but especially playing the blues and, playing for people too, I found something in my life that constantly renews itself and never seems to get old to me, because I'm always trying to do it a different way. So I have something that renews itself, and I like that about jazz and blues,
But the life of a jazz musician is not particularly lucrative. I mean, very few are able to make a decent living. So it's almost a committal where you're going to ride the tide, whether it's good or whether it's bad. What keeps you going?
Well, back in the day, as they say in the 70s, when I got into music, and when I say it chose me, I wasn't really thinking about the monetary value like kids do today. And I just was so in love with the music once I heard Miles and Dizzy and, Stan Getz and everybody else, and Lee Morgan, Hampton Hawes. I just fell in love with the music, and it was like just a gut reaction, and I was just sold. And I do my best. I play and I teach. This weekend I'm doing like 4 or 5 gigs, and I'm also teaching at the 92nd Street Y in the senior program, teaching seniors there, jazz history. So, I scotch tape together a living, and it's good. It works out pretty good for me. It took me 32 years in New York to accomplish what I did in 10 years in Boston.
Tell me something. What happens when you walk into a club and you're playing your heart out and you get this lukewarm response from the audience? How do you cope with that?
Well, you were there this past weekend, and it happens all the time. I say that sometimes I just feel that it normally doesn't happen. I say 90% of the time.
And we're going to talk about that soon on the other side of the break. And we're going to come out of the break with one of your selections from your CD dedicated to the art. So stay tuned with us, folks.
And Robert, just so you know, this is a long break for us, so don't be discouraged if you have to wait for a few minutes before we get back to you.
You can play some music. You can practice while we're on break. So stay with us, folks. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the radio. We're minus Peter Moses today, but it's John Charan and I here trying to keep you happy and involved with the music.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Charan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Dulcet tones of jazz musician Robert Silverman, who we just happen to have on the air today. Rob, I don't know the name of that tune. You're going to have to tell the audience.
I even forgot it myself. Let me see. I'm taking a look at this album. Oh yeah, I think that's
on Dedicated to the Art.
Yeah, I think it's that one's called "Jumping Through Hoops." Yeah, I think that's Jumping Through Hoops, or I think that's Jumping Through Hoops or Sleight of Hand. It might be either Jumping Through Hoops or Sleight of Hand. It's been a few years since I wrote that.
And Nikki, the main man engineer, says that it is track 2 on Dedicated to the Art.
Okay.
So Nikki says that didn't help because we still don't have the title to it. But the point is that CD is still available, and they can get it, I guess, through you. If someone wants to buy your CD, Rob, how would they go about doing that? Because you have other CDs too.
I guess they can get in touch with me, through my email if they want to, or silbox@AOL.com, silbox@AOL.com, or go to my Facebook page, to the Robert Silverman Band page on my Facebook page.
Okay, so I want to make sure that for people who are listening, they have access to your music. So again, it's Robert Silverman on Facebook. Now, there are a bunch of Robert Silvermans on Facebook, so
they put in Robert Silverman Jazz, they'll come up with my band page, and they can message me on that page, because I'm the only one, I think, that has Robert Silverman Jazz. Yeah.
Now, I want to talk further about your work with Alzheimer's patients, which we had discussed at the beginning of the show,
mm-hmm.
and how you feel that has impacted the Alzheimer's patients, their cognizance, their recognition of music. What does it do?
Well, I just did it yesterday, actually. I was just there yesterday, and some of the people, I've had actually some of the patients come up to me And I think the woman's name is Renee, and she comes up to me, she says, "Your music is medicine for me." She always comes up and says, "Your music is medicine." And you know, over and over, I'll hear stuff like that. And a guy yesterday was up there, Roy, and he said, "I'm a big opera fan, but you sound great, you know, playing jazz." And I just think that in America, my feeling is that we lump people with Alzheimer's all together, and I feel that a lot of the people there could actually be interviewed on the air like I'm being interviewed now. But in America, we tend to lump all the Alzheimer's cases into one thing, and through my little humble work, I've found out that that's not true, and that, you know, some people can just, they'll notice who I am right when I come in, what you're going to play for us today. So what I've learned, I'm not sure, I just hope that I'm impacting it well, but on the same time, I've been impacted by realize that Alzheimer's is a complicated word, and there's all varying degrees of it, and it's not necessarily something that gets worse and worse, because I see some people that are the same as when I was there 5 years ago. It's not always going, people say, going to the worst. It's some people are very stable, and they stay that way. And I played for several people, 3 or 4 people yesterday, that are always like happy with the music. We talk about life. And so I just think that America has lopped it all into one category, and I just think the music just helps. I try to play old standards that go all the way back to the 1900s. And then, you know, then I can sneak in my own stuff, like you just played on the air. I'll throw in an occasional original cut. But I try to sandwich it in between stuff that, like between T for Two, I Can't Get Started. I just learned a new one today that Monk played called Everything Happens to Me. You know, when you play these tunes, you engage people because, you know, you show the audience that you're trying.
Robert, I'm curious. I'm curious if you've heard any feedback from therapists or medical professionals saying that what you're doing is beneficial, and trying to give an explanation as to what that might be.
Well, usually when I'm playing, to tell you the truth, there aren't, you know, people like therapists, or only my boss is around, and I won't give her name, but she's very cool because she used to manage Benny Goodman at the end of his career. So we kind of all do it with the assumption that it's beneficial. And we have the assumption when I walk in there that it is going to be beneficial. So we're starting off with a positivity, not a negativity. And so we go from a very nice point to hopefully a higher nice point. And my boss has had me there for a long time, and we've attempted to do songwriting workshops too, where the people brainstorm their own words, and then I go home and I set the words to music, and then I bring the music back to the life guidance or Alzheimer's floor, and then reteach it to the people with their own words. And what I try to stress is that they're making it up. It's not my stuff; it's their stuff. I like people to feel like they own their own music. Just like when I compose, I feel good about writing. And when people make up a song or words there, it's not very easy to do. I like them to feel that they are the creators of it.
I just want to throw this out to the audience. If you have questions about music and Alzheimer's, you can call in. The number's 914-636-0110. That's 914-636-0110. And we're going to have more music coming outside of the next break. So, losing my voice here.
I can pinch it since you're trying to make sure that you don't go hoarse. I had that problem in the last program. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the radio here on WVOX 1460 AM and heard worldwide at WVOX.com. I'm John Charan, along with our Dina Seward, and our special not in studio, but online guest, our phone-in guest, is Robert Silverman, a jazz musician who's talking to us about an interesting project he's working on. helping people with Alzheimer's through music. We also are talking about Robert's history and background in dealing with music and dealing in the jazz community. And we'll get more into that after a brief Fox News break. Again, this is Westchester Eye on the Radio. We hope you keep listening, and we'll be back right after this.
With world and national news, here is the latest update from Fox News Radio on 1460 WVOX.
This is a Fox News alert. I'm Rick
Station
1460 WVOX.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
You're listening to the music of Robert Silverman, a jazz musician from Riverdale, who is here and joining us here on Westchester Eye on the Radio, our weekly discussion of issues relating to Westchester and the surrounding area. Robert's on the phone, and we're talking about jazz. We're talking about the way he has developed a jazz program that helps Alzheimer's patients. And, Robert, I have a question that I'm going to ask you here. The American cultural historian Gerald Early, somebody that we see a lot on PBS.
Yeah, I'm familiar with him, yeah.
He came out with a comment a few years ago where he said, quote, "There are only three things that America will be remembered for 2,000 years from now when they study this civilization: the Constitution, jazz music, and baseball. These are the three most beautiful things this culture's ever created." What do you think about that statement?
I disagree, because I think those three are cool, but and especially the jazz part I like, you know. But he's forgetting about the great abstract artists in America too. I think America will always be remembered for great artists like, you know, Jackson Pollock and the whole history of American art, which I follow. And I know Ardina is really into the visual. I think American, especially visual art, all the way from John Sloan all the way up to current, through the abstract expressionists in America, you can't beat it. So I would add that, and I would also add musical theater, Broadway, jazz, baseball. I think he's leaving out a couple things, and I think that it's easy to say the three, but I think there's more.
While we're on the topic of the history of jazz, you know, jazz didn't become, I hate to use the word legitimate in American culture until later on, probably past mid-century. Early on, it was considered, as they called it, race music. It was considered something bad.
It was considered decadent.
It was considered decadent.
I think what really changed it around was it wasn't necessarily, I think when Paul Whiteman and George Gershwin started, George Gershwin was very important with his writing of Porgy and Bess to depict the Deep South. And then at that same time, he was working on Rhapsody in Blue. And so Paul Whiteman at that time, who was kind of erroneously called the King of Jazz, and got together with Gershwin, did orchestrated Rhapsody in Blue, and that was one of the first pieces taken into the concert hall. And Rhapsody in Blue was very jazz and blues inflected, even though it was classical music and written down music. And then later on, I think John Hammond did Spirituals to Swing, which also was in Carnegie Hall. And slowly, Ardina's right, it took until 1938 or 1940 to get jazz into the concert hall, and it took a long time to integrate jazz, which is a very important thing because, like, Charlie Christian and Roy Eldridge and Billie Holiday were the first people to really integrate. At that time, there were black bands, there were white bands, and there was no collective in between. But some people like Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw, Charlie Barnett, they became so big in the industry, so they didn't have to listen to the racial stereotypes. And they said, "Look, you don't want Billie Holiday to go on. Well, I'm not going to go on." And so with the advent of integration in jazz, I think it moved towards more acceptance, because it was just better for the whole world, better for jazz, better for everybody.
But did the character of jazz change once it was adopted by white musicians?
Well, I think the main it's not so much. I think what really changed, the real big change in jazz was going from swing music, which was black and white, because you had Duke Ellington's band, Count Basie band, Tommy Dorsey, Glenn, all the big bands, black and white, were great. But I think what really changed in jazz was going into the 40s and the advent of bebop, starting what they call bebop, because once it moved from a dance music to more of a Charlie Parker's, a fast note kind of riffing, improvisational music, people couldn't really dance to it as much anymore. So I think what happened for myself, jazz became more of a black music, and as it moved into the expression of the racial identity in the 1960s, and I think, hello?
Yeah, we're here. Go ahead, Robert.
I think a lot of the folks that were listening to the dance aspect of music were caught off guard by bebop. I don't look at it as really. I think it's always been erroneous. I think that everybody can play jazz if they dedicate their lives to it. That's why I called my record Dedicated to the Art. So one of the main things when I was with Jackie McLean in Hartford, I wrote a paper for Jackie and said, I don't know if I should go into the jazz world because I'm white. And Jackie gave me an A+ on the paper, scolded me and said, jazz is a rainbow of colors, and cited all these white musicians that were important to the history of jazz and said, go along and make your contribution to the music. And that really kind of changed my life.
We're speaking with jazz musician Robert Silverman. And Robert, I'm really enjoying your discussion on the history of jazz here. I've always found that, Ken Burns, the American documentarian, makes some marvelous programs for PBS.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that, he hit the nail on the head with, in terms of relating back to Gerald Early, because I think his two best programs remain to be baseball and jazz. I think that they're both excellent programs. And I learned an awful lot about the history of jazz when I saw that program.
Yeah, it's great, but I always do. I'm teaching jazz history at the 92nd Street Y as we speak every Friday, 10:30 to 12, and I kind of use a Ken Burns disclaimer for my class, and a lot of people got mad at Ken Burns when he chose the best of, and he had to make the albums that CDs that went along with the show.
Mm-hmm.
You're always going to miss somebody, like you're John, right?
Yes.
I'm always going to miss the trombone player that you think is your favorite.
Right.
Ken Burns might not mention, let's say, Roswell Rudd. He might mention J.J. Johnson instead. But Duke Ellington's, but I do a disclaimer. I might not mention your favorite guy, but I'm doing my best, and Duke Ellington said it really well. If you want to read a great book on jazz, Music is My Mistress, Duke Ellington's autobiography is fantastic. And he just simply, he said, jazz, it's beyond categories. And he also said something very important. John might like his trombone player played one way. Ardina might like another thing, and I might like it. Nobody's wrong.
That's absolutely right, and it's a lot like in baseball. You can see that certain people clearly 100% belong in the Hall of Fame. Other people, it's a matter of personal preference and taste. But we're not talking about baseball. We're talking about jazz with musician Robert Silverman, and you're listening to Westchester Eye on the radio here on WVOX 1460 AM and heard worldwide at WVOX.com. I'm John Charan, along with Ardina Seward, and we'll be back with more conversation with Robert Silverman after a brief Fox News break, so stay tuned.
The right side of your radio dial.
1460 WVOX.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Charan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
You are listening to Westchester Eye on the Radio. Our guest is Robert Silverman, and your hosts are John Charan, Ardina Seward. We are minus Peter Moses today, but Peter, if you're listening, you're hearing some hot jazz.
He's probably very upset because we both know that he does love jazz, and so the fact that he can't be here is probably really, really nagging at him.
Well, and so we were talking about music, jazz music history, and the artists that you have worked with. Now, I mean, I know it sounds like a terrible segue, but why is it that some jazz musicians function on drugs and others don't? Is there something in the creative process that works side by side with drugs?
I'm not sure, but I was going to ask if it, just before I get into that, could I tell people where I'm going to be playing?
Absolutely. We want to make sure you do that, and in addition to playing, where they can get tickets, and again, repeat your website as well. So all that stuff, why don't we get that out of the way?
Well, this weekend, we're playing an extra special good place. I'm playing with a bass player at the Knickerbocker Bar and Grill on University Place, 33 University, Friday and Saturday nights, 9 to 1. And then on Saturday, before I go there, I actually going to be playing a solo piano gig at Jules Bistro on St. Mark's Place from 6 to 8, and then I'm going to run over to the Knickerbocker and play there all night. And usually, Ardina's been by the next couple of Fridays after this. I'll be at the Indian Road Cafe in Inwood on West 218th Street from 7 to 9. And I just suggest if you want information, go to my Facebook page or Robert Silverman Jazz Band and stuff like that. I usually post all the gigs coming up.
And all of your venues are really great venues, great places to hear jazz. I mean, between Sugar Bar, Jules, Indian Road Cafe, and Knickerbocker, these are wonderful, wonderful places.
I really feel blessed these days, and I'm always just constantly being thankful that I can make my living, that I can make my living with my hands playing music, because it is a blessing, and I don't for 1 minute, for 1 second, do I take it for granted.
Now, going back to the before we talked about where you were going to appear, why do so many jazz musicians get caught up in this abyss of drugs that takes them down and just? I
think it's just a lot of artists, not just tend to be, a lot of people, even in the rock world. You see all the people like Hendrix, Janis Joplin, all these people. I think the creative spirit of the artist, you must, it sometimes with the constructive comes the self-destructive, and a lot of times I think that such intensity is running through these people that is sometimes, in a weird way, take it out on themselves, and I also think that, during Charlie Parker's time, it was the hip thing to do that, and so I've heard from a lot of players that everybody, wanted to emulate Bird, and by doing that, he was into heroin, so people followed in line. But now, thank God, we've learned from the 40s and 50s, and most of the jazz musicians I know, don't drink much and don't use drugs anymore. So we've learned from that chapter to try to keep our lives clean.
But what I'm trying to get at is, do some people use drugs as a way to access creativity?
I can't really say that. I can't really answer that question because I don't myself, and I believe that it's hard for me to answer that, because for me, creativity and the muse is just like about hard work. Like even my own son said, I asked, we're talking about genius. He says, I don't really believe in genius. I believe in hard work. I said, I think, success in the field is just like 10% talent and 90% hard work. Before I got this phone call from you, I was going to sit down and practice some more, and I've been at it for many, many years, going on 50 years. But I love, like Sonny Rollins said it, happiness is practicing the saxophone, Like I enjoy it. So I can't really answer to your question about that because I've never really been involved with drugs or alcoholism myself, but I have seen people, lots of, people in the industry that have. But I haven't really talked to them about their reasons, so hard for me to answer that one.
Do you see your music then as a kind of zen?
I see it as like the great writers would write every day as a job. So I set it aside as time every single day to write music, because I think like the great authors like Faulkner, Hemingway, Baldwin, people like that would do it every day and discipline the creative faculty in their mind to work for them. Bill Evans would say, the great jazz pianist would say, I might not be feeling like playing a gig some night. I feel terrible. I get to the gig. But when I turn on the light switch, there's the creativity, because I've disciplined it to work for me for so long. Like, part of the creative process is mystical and godlike, and part of it is just hard work and disciplining that faculty to come into your life every day. I know a lot of stuff that I write is not going to be good, but I still write it, and maybe one or two things will reach the bandstand. But I'm okay with that. I mean, I have thousands of compositions at home, and maybe, only a select few of those will get on Dedicated to the Art or Sound of Light, because, the cream kind of rises to the top, and you feel which is your best work and which stuff is going to just stay in the notebooks, But I work at it every single day, and because I really enjoy it.
Oh, that's a great way to look at things, and it's almost a metaphor for other aspects of people's lives where they don't necessarily have to be musicians. They can be writers, they can be performers or whatever. But it's the old story. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. So you guys,
same thing with you guys. You do shows so much, on the air, that your shows get better and better. Hopefully, because you're doing it every week, and when we do something constantly, when the band plays constantly, we get better. Success breeds success.
What about, do you think that the digital age has made that success somewhat easier as far as composition? I mean, now they have all sorts of things you can get online, beats and horns and whistles.
I'm the antithesis of that, Ardina. As you know, I'm a dinosaur. I write with the pencil at an 111-year-old piano. And I enjoy putting pencil to paper, much like an artist will put paint to a canvas. And I know a lot of my friends, use all these programs, Sibelius and all these things to write music. I'm old school. I like to put a pencil on a paper, and I copy it over with a marker so the musicians can see it. That's just who I am. But I went to a very traditional music school in the New England Conservatory, which also gave me a classical education. So I enjoy the act of putting pencil to paper, and that's just how I do it. And I know that there's a lot of things out there, and my way is kind of antiquated. But one of the things I think that's kind of hurting now is that the digital age is kind of hurting this year. Since dedicated to the art, my new CD, Sound of Light, no one has CD players anymore, so people are very reticent to buy CDs at gigs anymore, especially young people in their 20s. You know, they all stream music. So,
and Robert, we're running out of time here, so that hopefully you'll be able to come back some other time. We've been speaking with Robert Silverman. Robert, why don't you tell people where they can find out more about your jazz band online?
Well, they could just go to I'm the manager of Robert Silverman Jazz Band, and now because I got inspired by this show, I'm going to go do postings of all the new gigs on Robert Silverman Jazz Band, just in case you want to look.
And remember, he'll be at the Knickerbocker and Jules this weekend, and he'll be at the Indian River Cafe in the future weeks. Now, yeah. Ardina, tell us a little bit about our next guest.
Next week, we're going to have Dr. Joe Fulton on the air, who is a cardiovascular surgeon up in Poughkeepsie, and he runs Mercy Missions to Malawi. And we're going to find out why he does it, how he does it, and how other people can help. So,
and we'll fade out with Robert Silverman's music. Here, you've been listening to Westchester Eye on the Radio, our weekly discussion of issues relating to Westchester. And until next week, everyone, have a great week.
.1460 WVOX and WVIP HD2, New Rochelle, a Whitney Global Media Station.